The snow made everything look clean. That was the trick of it. A white sheet thrown over a world that still bled the same, still broke the same, still hid men who knew how to wait. The convoy had been moving slow, tires crunching over crusted drifts, exhaust hanging low in the thin air like a warning they couldn't read. By the time they reached the cut between the ridgelines, daylight was already harsh, sunlight bouncing off packed snow, turning the valley into a glare trap. Sunglasses helped, but they also made shadows deeper. Every rock looked like it might move if you stayed too long. They dismounted because the road pinched down to nothing. 2 vehicles, 1 tech, 1 hard case that never left the tech's hands, and a squad that had done this kind of escort enough times to get tired of it. Routine, they told themselves. Just a hop back to base before the afternoon wind started. Breath steamed from balaclavas. Gloves squeaked against rifle grips. Their boots sank just enough to remind them the snow wasn't soft, just deceptive, a crust over emptiness. And it was too quiet. The squad leader, Staff Sergeant Kellen, raised a fist and froze them. He listened the way good leaders listened, not for sound but for the absence of it. No distant goat bells, no crows, no random wind-driven clatter, just the dry hiss of cold air sliding down stone. He should have turned them around right there. Instead, he signaled forward, and the lead element stepped into the shallow trough. The first burst came like a door kicked in. It wasn't wild. It wasn't panicked. It was disciplined fire, short, controlled, aimed at the places men had to be if they wanted to move. A line of rounds raked across the front, stitching the snow with sudden dark punctures. One soldier dropped so hard it looked like the ground had yanked him down. Another screamed and collapsed, grabbing his leg as blood turned white snow into pink slush in seconds. Chaos didn't arrive loudly at first. It arrived as an instant rearranging of the world. Contact front, someone yelled, too late, because everyone already knew. They hit the ground behind rocks and the shallow lip of the trough, scraping elbows raw through cold fabric. The tech, civilian clothes under a borrowed jacket, face pale, tried to curl around the hard case like it could make him invisible. Kellen shoved him down behind the rear vehicle's wheel well. Get low. Kellen barked. Don't. The rest of his warning disappeared under a crack that sounded different. A single shot, sharp and confident, snapped past where his head had been an instant before. The round smacked stone and exploded little shards into his cheek. A head plucker. High ground. The squad's automatic rifle answered. A heavier sound, a burst meant to force heads down. But the moment it roared, another weapon opened up, an enemy machine gun, anchored somewhere ahead, hammering the center of the trough. The rounds didn't just hit, they herded. Anyway, the squad tried to shift. The fire walked with them like an invisible hand shoving their shoulders. Radio. Get me. Kellen started. The radio spit back at him. Static. Squeal. The sound of a mouth trying to talk with a fist shoved down its throat. Base. This is. Kellen tried again. Louder. Like volume could break physics. Nothing but jammed air. The calls stepped on themselves, cut off mid-word, replaced by a steady, ugly tone that pulsed like a heartbeat you didn't want. Jammer. The long-range link was dead. Even the short-range handsets fluttered, half-connecting, dropping, then reconnecting just long enough to tease them with a fragment. Repeat, came a broken voice, then a wash of noise. Kellen's eyes flicked across his men. They were pinned in a perfect V of rock and snow, the ridgelines rising on both sides. The enemy had chosen this place because it wasn't a place, it was a geometry problem, and the solution was blood. He signaled with his left hand, tight, sharp motions. Sec to left, sec to right. Keep heads down. The team leaders mirrored him. Men shifted to cover angles they couldn't see without exposing themselves. The enemy knew that too. Anyone who tried to lift their head got plucked. Not suppressed, selected. A helmet edge, a shoulder, the hint of movement. The sniper up high was walking rounds onto them with patience. Then the rear vehicle shuddered. An RPG cracked into the snow near the tires, a blast that threw up a cloud of powder and gravel. The vehicle lurched as rubber shredded. The smell of burned metal punched through the clean cold. The exit behind them became a smoking choke point with 2 dead wheels and a crater that forced any retreat into open ground. "Rees blocked?" someone shouted. "No kidding." Kellen reached for smoke. He yanked a grenade from his kit and tossed it forward. Another soldier did the same. Gray plumes bloomed, and for half a second it looked like they bought themselves a keratin. The wind stole it. Cold air sheared the smoke thin, stretched it into ghost stripes, revealed silhouettes instead of hiding them. Visibility became a patchwork of white glare and drifting gray. No solid concealment, just shifting luck. The medic, Corporal Mendez, crawled toward the first downed soldier. His body stayed low, elbows dragging through snow, face tight with focus. He got close, reached out. A buzz snapped over him, so low it shaved snow off the ground. He froze, half behind a tire, half in the open. The downed soldier moaned, trying to kill, trying to pull himself behind cover that wasn't there. Mendez couldn't move without exposing both of them. The medic's gloves shook once, then steadied. Kellen tried the radio again because that's what leaders did when the universe refused them. "Base, this is static." The jammer-tone pulsed harder, mocking him. Someone shouted, "Birds on a window." That was the worst part. They'd already called for extraction before the convoy left the sensor site. A helicopter would be circling somewhere out beyond the ridgeline, with fuel and weather and orders. It couldn't wait forever. If it missed the window, the squad didn't just lose air support, they lost their way out. And in this cold, wounded men didn't just bleed. They froze. Kellen's mind did what it always did under pressure. It narrowed. He counted casualties. He counted magazines. He mapped angles in his head. He looked for the one move that would change the problem. And he couldn't see it. Then something impossible happened. The enemy machine gun, dominant, steady, shaping everything, stopped mid-burst as if someone had yanked the belt out of it. Silence where violence was supposed to be. For one stunned heartbeat, the trough felt like it had gone deaf. Even the squad's own breathing sounded loud. Then the handsets changed. The ugly jammer tone on the handheld radio faded, not cleanly but like a fist loosening. A single clear syllable broke through, sharp enough to make Kellen's head snap. "Down!" Then it cut again. Static rushed back, but it was different now. Thinner, not fully smothered, like someone was fighting the signal. A distant crack echoed across stone. One shot, not from the squad. It came from somewhere else, somewhere higher, somewhere with an angle none of them had. A pause, a second crack, and the head plucker went quiet. Not a gradual drop in pressure, a sudden absence, like a switch flipped off. Kellen exchanged looks with his nearest team leader. No friendly team was scheduled on that ridge. No air assets, no overwatch. No one in their element had line of sight on that sniper position. Yet someone had just erased it. Kellen pressed his handset again, voice low, like the enemy could hear words through static. "If you're out there, identify." Nothing. He whispered a name anyway. Any name. A habit. A superstition. "Ghost, you copy." Then he realized he didn't even know who he was calling. On the far slope, through drifting smoke and glittering snow, he caught a movement. A small figure moving low and fast behind rocks, too far to identify, but unmistakably deliberate. Not running like panic, not stumbling like Faye, moving like purpose had a map. The squad didn't know it yet, but their rescue had already started long before the first shot in the trough. Hours earlier, the base had been alive in the way small bases were alive, routine, contained, warm in pockets and brutally cold everywhere else. The field kitchen was the warmest place that wasn't the medical tent. It smelled like coffee and onions and hot metal. Steam crawled up into the air and condensed on hanging tops, dripping back down like the place was sweating. In that kitchen, a junior specialist worked before dawn, sleeves rolled, head tucked tight under a cap. Her hands moved with practiced economy. Ladle, stir, measure, taste. She didn't waste motion. She didn't waste words. Most of the unit knew her only as Chow. Some didn't even bother with that. They'd shuffle through, grab a tray, crack a joke, and move on. "Safe job," they'd say. "Best seat in the war. Warm hands, warm belly." Lucky. She didn't correct them. She listened. The kitchen was a funnel for information. Patrol leaders came through. Their radios turned down but not off. Drivers argued about routes. Platoon sergeants complained about fuel. The techs from the sensor site whispered about equipment like it was sacred. She heard all of it. She kept a small notebook tucked under a crate where grease stains would disguise the ink. It wasn't a diary. It was a pattern log. Weather shifts. Route timings. Which ridge lines carried wind and which trapped it. Which radio channels crackled near which outcroppings. And lately, she'd noticed something new. A dead spot. A section of terrain near the ridgeline where comms didn't just weaken like they should in mountains. They died clean. Like someone had cut a wire that wasn't there. She'd mentioned it once to a sergeant as he wolfed down eggs. Comms drop hard near the cut by the old drainage. She'd said, neutral, like it was a note about salt. He'd waved a fork at her. Terrain. Mountains eat radios. You keep the coffee hot. Another day, she'd seen footprints outside the wire near a maintenance path. Not the scattered mess of locals or wildlife. Too clean. Too deliberate. Spaced like men moving with purpose, towing in, testing snow crust. She'd reported it. A private took notes. The notes went into a folder. The folder sank under 100 other problems. It wasn't her lane. That phrase came at her in different voices. Not your lane. Cook. Not your lane. Support. Not your lane. Stay behind the wire. She had asked once for range time. Not because she wanted to play soldier. Because she needed to remember the feel of a trigger, the honest language of recall. A senior NCO had laughed like it was cute. You want to shoot? Stir a pot faster. So she stirred. And she listened. There was a sealed letter in her pocket she never opened on base. Paper creased from being handled too much, corners worn soft. It was the kind of letter that didn't weigh much but made you walk heavier. She touched it when she thought no one was looking, like checking a bruise. The morning of the convoy, she was assigned to load rations and thermoses onto the vehicles. Support detail. No weapon issued beyond the base perimeter. She carried hot containers out into the brightening day, steam curling from lids, and watched the squad gather. Staff Sergeant Kellen stood with his team leaders, going over a route that was routine on paper. Escort a tech in a hard case from the sensor site back to base before weather closed. The tech, thin, sharp-eyed, wearing borrowed gear like a costume, clutched the case with both hands. He didn't put it down. Not once. She saw that and filed it away. When she handed Kellen a thermos, he nodded thanks without looking at her face. Just a quick nod, like she was part of the equipment list. She didn't mind. Being unseen had become its own kind of cover. As the convoy rolled out, she walked back into the kitchen. The heat hit her cheeks. The noise of utensils filled the air, controlled chaos that made sense. Then a spare hand held on a shelf made a sound. Not a voice. A pulse. Faint rhythmic interference, like a metronome ticking just under the channel. She turned it up, listened, stepped closer. The pulse stopped. She stepped back. It came again, faint. She stayed at the radio like it was an animal watching her. Then she stepped outside the kitchen tent into the cold. The pulse stopped again. She stood there with snow glare in her eyes, listening to nothing. She went back in. Pulse. Out. Silence. In. Pulse. It wasn't random. She didn't have time to name what it meant before the distress call hit. It came through as a garbled, broken transmission that didn't sound like any voice wanted to. Contact. Static. Pinned. More static. Need. Then nothing but choking noise. Heads turned. People froze with mugs half raised. Someone shouted for the operations tent. Boots moved. Chairs scraped. The base suddenly felt small. The chain of command reacted like chain of command did. Questions. Checks. Confirmation. Who's up? Where's the QRF? What's aviation doing? Weather? Fuel? Minutes didn't exist out there. But inside the wire, minutes were a process. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them argue about options while the radio hissed like a dying thing. No one looked at her. That was fine. She walked to the back, where supplies sat stacked in crates. She grabbed a small pack, medical basics meant for the kitchen crew. Bandages, tape, tourniquet, pain meds. She shoved it down. She opened a resupply bin, fingers moving fast. Extra magazines were there for the perimeter guards. She took what she could without leaving it empty. Counted them. Felt the weight. Then she went to the rack where the base kept old rifles for emergencies. Nothing fancy. A basic optic. Enough to hit what you could see. Her hands didn't shake when she lifted it. They shook later. Always later. She moved to the far side of the base where a maintenance gap existed. An imperfect seal in the wire where vehicles sometimes passed. She didn't have permission. She didn't ask. She stepped through before anyone's voice could catch up to her. Cold slapped her face hard enough to wake every nerve. Daylight on snow meant contrast. A person moving upright was a black mark on a white page. The mountains would read her like ink. So she didn't move upright. She stayed low. Used rock shadows. Used dips. She kept the sun behind her whenever she could so anyone looking would have to squint into glare. It wasn't invisibility. It was forcing the enemy to make mistakes. She avoided the obvious route, the road the convoy had taken. Instead, she followed a frozen drainage line, wind-packed snow that was quieter under her boots. Still crunchy, but less. She moved in short bursts timed with gusts, letting the wind cover sound. She stopped often, letting her breathing slow, letting her ears reach out. Her handheld caught fragments. Not enough to talk, only enough to listen. Wounded, re-blocked, jam. She couldn't answer. She couldn't even be sure they'd hear her if she did. The jam wasn't total now. It pulsed, like someone was switching it on and off, testing. She climbed higher, using her free hand to steady herself against stone that burned cold through gloves. Her mind tracked angles. If the squad was in the trough, the enemy had to own high ground. If the radios were jammed, a jammer had to be placed with line of sight to their location. If the enemy wanted more than bodies, they'd be controlling movement, shaping. She crested a low ridge and saw a boulder field ahead. And there it was, a small box strapped near rocks, camouflaged with cloth and snow, an antenna angled toward the cut. Wires ran from it to a battery pack buried in a shallow scrape. She didn't rush it. A lot of people died by rushing what they wanted to destroy. She scanned around it, slow, eyes searching for the human part of the machine. Then she saw movement, a bundled shape, hunched near the rocks. At first she thought it was a dead animal. Then it shifted. A muffled sound came out. A person. A local shepherd. Maybe. Someone with a scarf wrapped tight, hands bound, body pressed close to the jammer like an ugly decoration. Human noise cover. Human deterrent. If she shot the box and the round overpenetrated, if shrapnel flew wrong, if anything went sideways, she could kill a civilian. The enemy expected that. It was a trap built inside another trap. Her mouth tightened. She shifted her rifle down, away from the box. Protocol would have been to back off, report, wait for the right team. There wasn't time for protocol. There was only the work. She crawled closer, using a shallow dip to hide her approach. She pulled a knife from her kit and slid it along the wire she could reach, not cutting yet, just feeling, testing. The wire was stiff with cold. She traced it to where it met the battery pack. Cut power, not exploded. She waited for a gust. Snow hissed across stone. She sliced. The wire snapped with a tiny sound that would have been loud in a quiet room. Out here, the wind swallowed it. The jammer's steady pulse faltered. The ugly tone on her handheld faded. The air felt like it suddenly had room in it. The shepherd's eyes widened. He tried to speak through his scarf. She moved to him, knife working fast, cutting bindings. Quiet, she whispered, not as an order but as a promise. Quiet now. He nodded hard, desperate. When his hands were free, he pointed up the mountain, making a twisting motion with his fingers like a goat climbing. A path. A way up. He grabbed her sleeve and mouthed words she couldn't fully hear. But she understood enough. Enemy up. Men watching. Go that way if you want to live. She squeezed his wrist once, a silent thanks, then guided him toward a dip that would lead away from the jammer. Go, she breathed. Down. Don't look back. He went, stumbling, then moving faster as fear became fuel. She turned to the ridge. The wind kicked fine snow across stone, micro-whiteout moments that blinded her for half a second at a time. She used those moments to move. Dash, stop, breathe. Dash, stop, listen. The goat path wasn't a path so much as a series of notches in stone where hooves had found purchase. It was narrow, dangerous, and exposed. She climbed anyway, because sometimes the only safe route was the one everyone assumed no one would take. Halfway up, her handheld crackled. Any station, came a clipped voice, faint but clearer than before. The jammer was compromised. Not gone, but weakened. The air was fighting back. She didn't answer yet. If she transmitted, she could reveal herself. And if the enemy had listeners, they'd know someone was on the ridge. She climbed. At the top, she found a narrow shelf overlooking the cut. It was barely wide enough for her body. One wrong shift and she'd slide down into nothing. But it gave her an angle. Not on everything. Not on the whole fight. On the things that mattered. She lay prone, pack under the forend, elbow braced against rock, breath controlled. The optic was basic, but her eyes weren't. She scanned the ridgeline opposite the squad. And there, behind a cluster of stones, she caught a tiny flash. A mirror. A spotter's lens. A professional's habit. The sniper's hide. She felt the old part of her wake up, the part she'd kept buried under kitchen steam. The part that counted wind and distance without conscious thought. She had seconds before they noticed something was wrong with their jammer. Before someone looked up and saw a shape that didn't belong. She exhaled slow and let the wind lull. Her first shot cracked clean. The flash behind the stones vanished as if someone had simply removed it from the world. She waited, not rushing. Patience was a weapon too. A second shape shifted, spotter or assistant. She fired again. Silence answered. Down in the trough, she could feel the fight change. Not because she could hear every detail, but because the rhythm altered. The enemy machine gun had already stuttered. The sniper was now gone. That meant the squad would lift their heads. That meant movement. But the enemy wasn't stupid. Competent enemies didn't panic first. They adapted. She needed a ladder. Priorities. Force multipliers first. Always. Jammer controller. Radio spotter. RPG teams. Machine gun. Leader. She scanned for the jammer controller. Not the box. She'd cut that. The human who decided when to pulse it. Someone with a handset. Someone who listened for their own tone. She found him near a rock outcropping. Crouched, a small antenna handset held close. He was pointing, timing. He wasn't firing much. He didn't have to. He was the brain. She held her breath until her chest burned slightly. Wind shifted. She adjusted a hair. She fired. He dropped sideways, the handset tumbling into snow like a toy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then enemy fire in the trough became less coordinated, as if a conductor had vanished and the orchestra was playing from memory. She moved her optic to the right ridge where two figures were repositioning with a tube slung between them. RPG. They were trying to get a better angle on the rear vehicle, to finish blocking the exit, to pin the squad into a capture pocket. She took the gunner first. The tube slid off his shoulder and sank into snow. The assistant froze like his brain had stalled. He looked around, searching for a shooter he couldn't see, then began to crawl. She didn't waste a round on him yet. Panic could be useful. The machine gun was next. She found it by the rhythm, by the way its burst started and stopped. The gunner was tucked behind rocks, weapon on a bipod, muzzle just above the snow line. She put a round through the exposed part she could see. The gun went quiet. The assistant tried to tug it down, to reseat it, to make violence restart. She fired again, precise, and the assistant fell backward. Below, the squad's heads rose. They weren't safe, but they weren't locked in place anymore. The medic moved like someone released from a leash, dragging the wounded man into real cover and finally cranking a tourniquet tight with a grimace that was half relief, half rage. Kellen stood just enough to see. He didn't know where the help was coming from, but he felt the pressure lift like hands unhooking from his throat. He signaled, bounded movement. Two teams, leapfrogging, covering each other. The tech stayed in the center, hard case hugged tight, protected by buddies. Her shots weren't just killing now. They were shaping. Every enemy head that stayed down was space for her people to move. Then she saw something else. An enemy leader farther back. Not the jammer controller, This one was controlling the whole ambush, pointing, timing volleys, signaling flanking elements. He had a better view, better cover. He was the one who'd chosen this kill zone. He leaned out just enough, confident that his machine gun and sniper had kept the world owned. He was wrong. She waited for the wind lull. The mountain breathed out. The air steadied. She fired. The leader snapped back and fell out of sight. It wasn't a flashy moment. No slow motion. No dramatic scream. Just a body dropping and, with it, cohesion breaking like ice underfoot. Enemy fire became jagged. Less synchronized. More emotional. The pauses between bursts weren't tactical anymore. They were confusion. That was the turning point. The shot that didn't just remove a man. It removed the enemy's belief that they controlled the fight. Incompetent enemies, when they lost control, didn't always run. Sometimes they hunted. She felt it before she saw it. A change in pressure. A shift in how rounds snapped against stone near her shelf. Someone was probing her position. A round cracked rock inches from her face, spraying grit. Her cheek stung. She didn't flinch big. She didn't jerk. She went still. Fear hit her in the stomach like cold water. For a flash of a second, she wanted to scramble back, to crawl away, to disappear into the mountain. Then the other part of her, the part that had survived before, took over. Function. She forced her breath slow. Counted in, counted out. Let fear burn itself off like steam. She shifted her body a few inches, careful not to silhouette, careful not to crunch snow. The shelf was narrow, but it had micro-angles. She found one and tucked into it. She scanned again and caught movement. Two climbers pushing along the ridgeline toward her. Dark figures low against the snow, using rocks, moving with purpose. Counterhunt. And above them, something rose briefly into the air. A small drone, improvised, a quadcopter wobbling in the wind as it scanned. Not fancy, effective enough. Her optic fogged for a moment, breath moisture freezing at the edges. She wiped it with a sleeve, losing seconds that felt like minutes. She couldn't afford long shots now. Not with a drone searching. Not with climbers closing. She checked her magazines. Down to a handful of rounds. Every shot had to matter. Below, the squad was moving. She saw them bounding toward a new line of rocks, dragging the wounded. She saw Kellen signaling a change in direction. New extraction point. Because the original landing zone was now being bracketed by random enemy fire. Their radios crackled, clearer now, and she heard a clipped transmission cut through. New LZ. Mark. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The bird would The bird would adjust. She needed to buy time. She didn't shoot the climbers immediately. She shot the snow just ahead of them, a shaping shot that sent them flattening instinctively. It wasn't about killing. It was about slowing, making them believe they were already in a kill zone of their own. One climber tried to push anyway, crawling behind a rock. She waited until he exposed a shoulder and then put him down. The second froze, suddenly aware that bravery wasn't armor. The drone dipped, corrected, dipped again as wind slapped it. It hovered, searching for muzzle flash. She couldn't give it one. She shifted back, deeper into shadow, and waited for the drone to drift away before firing again. The enemy marksman took another shot at her shelf, cracking stone. He was closer now. He'd found her general area. She had maybe one more exchange before she was out of options. Below, rotor thump began as a distant vibration. It grew louder, cutting through gunfire, a sound that made men either pray or panic depending on which side they were on. The squad reached the new landing zone, a flatter patch sheltered by a ridge lip. They threw smoke. This time it held a little better, caught by terrain. The helicopter's shape appeared beyond the ridge, fast and low, rotors chopping cold air into a storm. The enemy saw it too. They surged, trying to push fire toward the LZ, trying to at least turn extraction into a massacre, if not a capture. She had 2 rounds left. She found the enemy marksman who'd been probing her shelf. He was exposed for a second as he shifted position, eager to finish the threat on the ridge. He wasn't looking down. He wasn't looking at the helicopter. He was looking for her. Underestimated. She steadied the rifle, ignoring the tremor in her forearm, ignoring the ache in her fingers from cold. She fired. He dropped. Her last round wasn't for a person. It was for a rock ledge above the remaining climber. She shot it, sending a small cascade of snow and stone down. The climber flinched and flattened, believing the mountain itself was attacking. That moment of hesitation was everything. She didn't have to win the ridge. She only had to hold it long enough. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of snow. Kellen's men moved like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. Wounded first, tech and case protected in the middle, weapons up even as they climbed. Mendez shoved the wounded man into the bird, his face grim and focused, blood on his gloves. Kellen looked back once, scanning the ridges like he could see the hand that had saved them. He couldn't. The helicopter lifted, rotors hammering, snow exploding outward. The bird rose and banked away, disappearing behind the ridge with the squad alive and the hard case still in their hands. On her shelf, the world went suddenly quieter again. Distant gunfire faded. Wind took over. She lay still for a second, letting the adrenaline drain enough to move without slipping. Then she began to crawl backward along the goat path, away from the shelf, away from the place where the enemy would soon arrive with anger and questions. She moved low and fast, deliberate, the way she'd been seen moving from the trough hours earlier, small against the ridge, but real. By the time the enemy climbers reached her shelf, there was nothing there but scuffed snow and the faint imprint of a pack. Back at base, daylight was fading into that cold blue that came before night, when everything looked like it had been dipped in steel. The helicopter's landing kicked up a storm of powder. Medics rushed out, grabbing the wounded, shouting for stretchers. The squad spilled out behind them, faces hollowed, eyes too bright. Alive, but changed. The tech clutched his hard case like it had fused to his hands. Kellen's boots hit the snow and he stood there for half a second, staring at the base like it was something new. He'd left that morning with routine in his bones. He'd come back carrying a different weight. In the operations tent, the debrief started sharp. Voices didn't have time to be polite when men had almost died. Why did you take that route? Comms went dead. Why? Where was QRF? Why didn't you hold position until? Accusation. Paperwork. Blame hunting for a target because it needed to land somewhere. Kellen took it, jaw tight, answering with facts. Kill zone. High ground. Jammer. Capture attempt. His eyes were still tracking angles even in a tent. The tech finally spoke, voice thin. They weren't trying to kill us. That shifted the room. He swallowed and forced the words out. They wanted me. They wanted this case. Someone demanded, what's in it? The tech hesitated, then looked at Kellen, and Kellen nodded once. The nod said, now, because if you don't tell them now, you may not get another chance. Sensor logs, the tech said. Response timing. Movement data. Patterns. They've been watching the base. They wanted proof. Proof of how fast you react. Proof of the routes you use. And if they captured me alive, he stopped, swallowed hard. They'd film it. Show they can reach into this place and take what they want. Propaganda. Intelligence. A win that lasted longer than a firefight. The commander's face went tight. So they scouted. A private spoke up, nervous. We had a report. Footprints near maintenance path. It got filed. Silence hit like a slap. Footprints pay off. Ignored evidence. Real warning buried under routine. Another NCO said, comms dead spot. Kellen's gaze flicked to the side like he'd been hit by memory. We thought it was terrain. The commander's jaw clenched. It wasn't. A patrol went out within the hour. They returned with a cut wire, a camouflage jammer box strapped to rocks, and a battery pack buried in snow. Intentional. Professional enough to be dangerous. Simple enough to be hidden. And with it, something else. A local man, shaken, scarf wrapped tight, hands raw from bindings. He spoke through an interpreter, voice low. He described being grabbed, tied near the device so anyone who fired would hesitate. He described enemy men watching the ridges, waiting for the convoy. Noise cover. Deterrent. Another layer of trap. The base had been watched. The base had been measured. The base had been tested. And still, the squad was alive. Because someone had moved before the system could. When the question finally came, who cut the jammer line? It didn't come as a gentle curiosity. It came like a demand, because the base needed to know if there was a second friendly element out there, or if they'd been saved by something they couldn't control. No one answered at first. Then the kitchen flap lifted, and the junior specialist stepped in, carrying a thermos like she belonged everywhere and nowhere. Her cheeks were wind-burned. Snow clung to her sleeves. A smear of stone dust marked one side of her face. The smell of smoke and kitchen grease clung to her like identity. The tent went quiet in a different way. People stared as if their brains couldn't fit her into the story they'd survived. Kellen stood slowly. He looked at her like he was seeing an outline become a person. "You," he said, voice rough. "It was you." She didn't nod like a hero. She didn't smile. She just set the thermos down on the table and kept her hands visible. "I heard the call," she said simply. "Comms were jammed. I went to check." A lieutenant's eyebrows shot up. "You left the wire?" "Yes." "With whose permission?" She didn't answer immediately, not because she was being dramatic, because the honest answer was, with no one's. And she didn't know if saying that would turn this room into a courtroom. Kellen spoke before she had to. "Permission didn't save us." That stopped the lieutenant's words. The commander studied her, not with anger, with a kind of recalibration. "You're the cook," he said, as if the title was suddenly inadequate. "I am," she said, "and I can shoot." Someone let out a breath that sounded like disbelief. Kellen's team leader muttered, "No kidding." The commander leaned forward. "How?" She gave them the truth in pieces they could swallow. She'd noticed the dead spot, the pulse interference, the footprints. She'd cut power to the jammer. She'd climbed a goat path with help from a local she freed. She'd taken the sniper, the machine gun, the controller. She didn't brag. She didn't decorate. Facts were enough. The room filled in the gaps with or because it always rushed in when reality was too sharp. When the debrief ended, paperwork began. That was how war respected you, by writing your name into forms. Kellen stayed behind and wrote his statement himself. Not vague praise, not mythology, specific, undeniable detail. The kind that couldn't be dismissed as luck. Later, when the base lights glowed against snow and the cold thickened outside the wire, she returned to the kitchen. The field kitchen was quiet now, only a few workers cleaning, the clatter of pans softened by exhaustion. Steam rose from a pot left on low heat, curling into the air like ghosts. She washed her hands. The water was warm enough to hurt. Under the grime, she saw her fingers trembling. Not fear now, not adrenaline. Aftershock. She gripped the sink edge until the tremor slowed. On a shelf beside the stove, her sealed letter sat where she'd left it that morning, tucked behind a spice tin. She'd carried it in her pocket so long it felt like part of her body. She'd never opened it here, never in this place where people knew her as the cook. Because if she opened it, she might become the person the letter described again. Tonight, the kitchen was empty enough. She dried her hands, picked up the letter. The paper was warm from being near the stove, like it had been waiting. She broke the seal. Inside was a transfer notice, edges worn. A disciplinary remnant from a different life. It spoke in cold language about reassignment, about an incident, about survival and blame braided together. It didn't say the word guilt, but it didn't have to. The spaces between the lines carried it. A past mission, a past team, a moment where she'd done everything right and still watched people die. A moment where her competence had made her live, and living had become a kind of accusation. Cooking had been penance. Cooking had been refuge. A place where she could keep others alive in a different way, with heat and calories and quiet work, without having to look through a scope again. Until today. She folded the letter back into its crease, slower than before. She didn't cry, not because she couldn't, because tears would have been another thing to manage, and she was tired of managing. Outside, the base carried on. Radios crackled. Boots stomped. Men laughed too loudly to prove they were fine. Somewhere in the medical tent, the wounded man breathed under blankets and drugs, alive because a tourniquet had finally been tightened under less fire. In the kitchen, she set a fresh pot on the burner. The flame caught. Water began to warm. Steam rose into cold air. Her hands shook again, then steadied as she stirred. The base went quieter, not because danger was gone, but because something had shifted. People had learned that rescue didn't always arrive with a call sign. Sometimes it arrived with steady hands that had been overlooked, hands that knew how to work in heat and cold, in calm and chaos, in silence and violence. She didn't need anyone to say thank you out loud. Not tonight. The pot began to simmer. Steam climbed, soft and constant. And in that rising white, she understood something she hadn't let herself believe in a long time. Belonging didn't always come from being seen. Sometimes it came from doing the work anyway, when no one was watching, when no one was listening, when the world was too loud, and the only thing that mattered was keeping people alive.